Hello everyone and welcome back to Pass the Aux Cord, a channel where the lighting situation is a bit, weird. And welcome back to Album of the Day, a series where we take a look at a great and oftentimes underappreciated album that deserves your attention. Today we're going to be taking a look at an album called A Desperate Attempt to Love Everything by Khary. Khary is a Providence, Rhode Island rapper who has been making moves in the underground since the mid-2010s with his alternative hip-hop projects. He first started gaining some attention, a bit of a cult following, and some notoriety back in 2016 with his project The Intern Aquarium EP. It also would go ahead and set up some themes and ideas that would be prevalent in much of his career following there. One of the main things that's set up on this project and the concept of it in and of itself is the idea of the intern being the protagonist and the intern's boss and or manager being the antagonist. There's also other things set up in this album and this run of time for his career, such as the yellow raincoat that he would often be wearing, especially during this EP or album run, and themes of water and the sea, hence the aquarium in the title. He then went on to release a few smaller projects, such as the fantastic Tidal Graves EP, eventually an EP called and then a mixtape called Captain, spanning from 2016 to 2018. During this time period, he did even more world building from time to time, especially introducing this Captain character on that mixtape, as well as giving us plenty of bops along the way. That all peaked in his most ambitious release before this point in 2020 with his album This Is Weird. This project would reintroduce the boss character, voiced by Jermaine Fowler in interludes, as well as Khary / the intern being our protagonist once again, such as it was in the Intern Aquarium EP. And this narratively shows Khary, or the intern, following his passion of being a rapper, and since having quit the job that the manager or boss character had him at, and the boss's struggle to try to replace him in the workplace, but not being able to. His skill and dedication to his craft showed greatly on that project, especially on songs like Satellites and Rearview Mirrors and 2, which have grown to be some of his biggest and most respected of all time, finally surpassing some of the biggest songs on Intern Aquarium. That is the last time we've heard from Khary in a full-length capacity, with one smaller EP project holding us over between 2020 and now, called 2, a sequel obviously to the first EP of that name. Despite how long and impressive his career has been before this point, we are technically only on album number 2 with A Desperate Attempt to Love Everything, and we're clearly seeing Khary in a much different aesthetic and form than we did before, even embracing alien aesthetics rather than the water themes that he previously did often. A change of pace seems like it is just what he needed to keep things fresh, and fresh is certainly something you could call this album. If you are a frequent listener of popular rap styles, the foundation that Khary is building upon is probably going to be pretty clear to you, but it's what he adds to that format that makes him and his music interesting. While still somewhat accessible, the beats that we can find him rapping over on this project are sometimes just as alien as the aesthetics he's embracing in the music video's promotional material and album cover. Right away, even in our first 2 songs here, we see that things are very unexpectedly free-flowing and abstract, providing a lot of dynamics to the songs, and giving us some really hard left turns that really keep you on your toes. One great example of this is the beautiful orchestral outro to the song Cannot Buy, which already was following 2 pretty abstract opening tracks. Even the poppiest, catchiest, and most wide appeal tracks are hitting us with some more abstract ideas and lush soundscapes than your average pop rap song would. A good example being Say My Piece, which instantly hits us with some vibey, smooth strings that gives you the impression that you know what's going to be coming next, and this song still manages to hit us with some hard left turns that come out of nowhere. And yet it's odd how effortless and consistent these songs manage to Stay. To summarize broadly, the production of this album is fittingly spacey, intricately layered, and at times stunningly beautiful. However, of course, the only thing more important on a rap album than the production is the rapper's performance themselves. And Khary's performances, thankfully, are some of his best yet and absolutely fantastic. It's not even necessarily fair to label him as just a rapper with how much singing he's doing on here. He's always been someone to find his way around a catchy hook. It's just that the ones that Khary was actually performing rather than a guest feature were typically rapped rather than sung, with a few exceptions in the past. There are some very notable exceptions, such as his song 2, which is one of his biggest songs, but it is very notable that we see him singing and rapping on almost all of the songs present on this album. When we hear him rapping, he's coming through with some excellent flows, a lot of confidence, and a lot of personality. He typically has a style that is fairly recognizable, although sometimes he hits us with some off-the-wall, completely unexpected vocal inflections and flows. What's a little bit less unorthodox, however, is his singing, but it's not hindered in any way by that fact. You have some of the catchiest and most memorable moments, especially with these being the hooks oftentimes, and that's especially true when the rapping and singing goes back and forth, such as the song You Say. His vocals are pretty impressive for the genre that they're in, partially just in how smoothly flowing and charismatic they are, but also in some ways a technical aspect as well. While Khary has always been a fairly conscious and introspective rapper, I don't think his lyrics have ever been as vulnerable, introspective, and relatable as they are on this particular album. He starts off the project speaking in much broader themes of the world as a whole, which brings about the alien concept. He uses this as a way to say that he's just generally disillusioned or disconnected to how his life is going. 4 tracks in, and then more and more as we get into the album, he dips into themes more of love and relationships. This then eventually peaks in the songs I Think I Might and the somewhat interlude cut that follows it, Be Desperate. He's certainly touching on a broad scope of topics here, but much like the album's sound, it all fits together strangely well, which is part of why this makes a cohesive and enjoyable experience. To bring up some favorite lyrics, the first one I'd like to bring up comes from the second track on the album, Aliens. This one he's talking about his brother's schizophrenia on the 3rd verse and the negative impacts it has had. This is a very vulnerable and personal moment on the album, and I think it's really nice to see him venting about such a situation. Verse 3 on Cannot Buy also has a somewhat similar moment, but this time it was a little bit more upbeat, not necessarily talking about his brother's schizophrenia, but instead sneaking into his comics and gaining the idea of a superhero from them. There are some much broader topics in this verse in and of itself, as you may be able to read here. She's Fine has a 3-bar run that is very relatable and also has a clever one-liner in it. I don't want no stepkids, shit, I don't want no kids at all. I'd probably be late picking them up from school is something I find relatable just in forgetting to do everything, but also I feel like most of us can relate to something like that. And then shoulda known it'd go up in smoke the moment you hit the jewel. At least I think it was intentional bringing up jewels like the vape and things going up in smoke. It all kind of ties together that way. Verse 2 of Waves hits us with some introspective lyrics about trying to find love. I especially love the end of this where he says, I may be being a little unrealistic, but if reality's a fallacy in which our hearts are a casualty, I'd rather be fake with you. My favorite waves hit me in my sleep, but I can't fucking sleep. Say My Piece has a few bars that I just like for the charisma of them. The first one being, I got the physique of a Martian, just being somewhat of a funny thing to say. Earlier, actually, on the song, he says, fucked up my barber, he fucked up my hairline, which, as a fellow bald person, is very funny to me. A slightly deeper and more anthemic and notable moment is the chorus of Purple Dye, this fools we love, fools we die, and then going on from there. Refrain does span most of the track, and I think it's just a beautiful moment for the album as a whole. Going into the track by track, track number 1 here is I Saw a UFO, which does a lot to set up some of the themes and the alien concept. It gives us some lush nature sounds and strings before going into Khary's rapping, where he has somewhat a restrained and quiet flow. Even just in this intro opening track, though, we already see the album doing more than it has to and going way above and beyond, with the closing of this song being this large emotional crescendo, beginning the repetition that would then become a motif brief of the lyric, "I wonder if they know." It's a glowing intro that sets the stage very nicely. Track 2, Aliens, was a song that was fairly hard for me to get into on my first few listens just because of how loose and abstract the structure of it is and how it just kind of goes wherever it wants to. That's not to discredit it at all though, because once you're used to it and once you've heard the song a few times and can really get into it, it's a very nice one, possibly even one of his best songs yet. Khary's actual vocal presence on the track is very interesting. He hits us with some falsettos at some times, which are a totally different texture than I would expect. And as mentioned before, the instrumental on this one matches that energy perfectly. What might actually be the most impactful and important thing about this song is the actual lyrics that it brings forth, which seem to be one of the most personal moments in his entire discography. The only moments I think that would even come close are Did I Fail, possibly Nomad, but neither of those actually hit as hard, at least in my interpretation. Cannot Buy introduces some of the most typical, but simultaneously some of the most strange elements the entire album has to offer. I think the instrumental on this one, while absolutely still enjoyable and interesting, is pretty forthcoming with what it's going to offer up. What's odd about the song is Khary's unorthodox flows. On the chorus of the song and in the verse, he has this flow where he's stretching out for a long time on the last word of each bar. I actually heard this one live before the album came out, and I wasn't really sure what to think of it then, and I certainly wasn't for my first few listens. Even now, it's a bit jarring, but I really appreciate that he went for something a bit more interesting. That flow, much like Aliens before it, is somewhat of an acquired taste, and if that wasn't enough to make you raise an eyebrow, then his high-pitched and choppy flow on the second half of the song certainly will be. Cannot Buy's ethereal outro leads perfectly into You Say, and this is a song that starts out so incredibly climactic. Something about the piano notes here feels like he's really telling a story, and it gets you invested right away. And that storytelling type intro leads us into what might be his most fun verse on the entire album, and this is just such a fun one to listen to from that point forward. That's all especially true with the call and response hook. From a songwriting perspective, this is the first one out of these first 5 songs that has some mainstream pop appeal. I could easily see this being a strong hit that crosses a lot of boundaries, gets him tons of plays in the future, and I really hope that it does. Despite the fact that it's a little bit poppier, no ambition is spared here, and it's still very creative. The theatrics of it all make for something very memorable. She's Fine reflects on some similar ideas as the song that comes before it, however it is a bit more loose and abstract like the first 3 tracks on the album. He intros the song on one of his loosest flows yet, and then the instrumental that follows that loose flow, once he starts rapping with a little bit more of a fast flow, shows its quirkier side. There's such a strange set of buzzy, bouncy, and mechanical sounds that go on through the track. It's such an oddly psychedelic moment. And I again have to give this one some credit for having some of the most blunt and relatable lyrics. I have fun listening to this one for a lot of reasons, but that down-to-earth relatability is certainly one of them. Waves is the second song on the album that I could see easily having some mass appeal and might be even more cinematic than You Say was before it. His likable singing on the song is something very easy to get invested in, and the I Dream On refrain is something very easy to sing along with. As far as production goes, the drums on this one are very spacious and vibey and make for one of the richest low ends on the entire project. He also has a moment on the song where it cuts back a little bit and he has a spoken word section that feels somewhat reminiscent of the song all the way back on Intern Aquarium titled 60, and in some ways it seems like this is a spiritual successor to it, but it's still so clear how far he's come from that point, just given how different this one is from 60. It helps even more so that this song has some direct references and callbacks to his previous songs. On Say My Piece, the first flow that he comes through with is absolutely exceptional. I love the repetition of the word awesome and how that's used. This one also has a hook that's almost as catchy as the one on You Say. It is such an anthemic song. The relatable and genuine aspects of his writing are in full form here, and a lot of the themes on this track remind me of a more well-refined version of his earlier tracks, which is something nice to see. I was also going to say that we have one of our more simple instrumentals on this song, but that actually feels odd to even make as a comment, just due to how densely layered and nice sounding this beat is. Track 8, I Think I Might, is still definitely a banger, but maybe a little bit more of a subtle one than some others that come before it. The effect-heavy falsetto chorus is somewhat of a turn that I was not expecting, although it's still catchy enough to stick with me as a whole. One thing I can really appreciate about it is that he still manages to hit us with some introspective and emotional moments, despite the fact that it has a wider pop-type appeal. Overall, this one might not be a huge standout, at least from my perspective, but it certainly acts as a bit of glue to hold the album together, as does the song that follows it, Be Desperate, which has a title that directly relates. This one essentially feels like an outro, and given how cinematic some of the outros, such as Cannot Buy, were before it, I'm not really sure why it wasn't just tacked onto the original song. You certainly wouldn't see this track on a playlist by itself in really any context. However, I think that it's sufficient on its own just fine. It's such a spacey and surreal and intense moment in the track list that really acts as a very nice piece when you're listening to the whole thing together. If we want to talk anthems like we did a few songs ago, Purple Dye is absolutely the answer here, as this might be even more anthemic. At first, this appears to be the most minimal in terms of production on the entire album, but then it goes ahead and hits us with two giant, explosive moments. There's such an impactful refrain that I mentioned on the lyrics section that really makes the whole thing something that you want to sing along with, want to just vibe out to. If you aren't singing along with this, by the end of the song, you are approaching it in the wrong way. This track also gives us a good dichotomy of the outward-looking and introspective aspects of his writing. Both hit heavy. This song stands out in more ways than one. Obvious has a somewhat disjointed and experimental beat that really gives us that alien feel he's been shooting for in the aesthetics. There's such strangely placed synths and sound effects that really make the whole thing captivating. Khary himself is also bringing just the right energy to each portion of the track. I love both his singing and his rapping on this track. However, if I were to bring up one critique, I just wish that the song was longer. Although that is somewhat of a compliment in and of itself, because if you're wishing that a song was longer, that means what is present here is quite good. Track 12, Wannabe, has a very interesting sounding intro to it, where he's coming through with this high-pitched, up-pitched with effects intro that makes for one of the poppiest feels and is immediately attention-grabbing. Overall, we're just seeing one of the most fun songs on the album. His lyrics, while maybe not some of the deepest, are still nice to see, just because he's ending it on somewhat more of an upbeat and motivational note, which is a great contrast to some of the darker emotions that are tackled on the earlier portions. And that somewhat upbeat note leads us then into the closer, Everything, which, as the title would suggest, is somewhat of a summary musically of everything that came before it. Most of what's present here are vocal samples that are mixed somewhat ambiently throughout the track of the actual rapped lines that he brings about in the earlier sections, and it comes together as this big spacious mix. There's some great guitar strings that are being played in the background of it all, and I think it's a somewhat psychedelic and experimental way to end off the album, and I absolutely have to respect that. It's something we haven't really seen before this project, but is very present all throughout it. It is also nice that this album closes on some nature sounds, making the whole thing a perfect loop if you're playing it seamlessly on streaming or wherever you may be, with it looping back forward to the intro song, which also has those. It's also even more of a perfect loop just because we have a specific dedicated intro and outro song. But overall, even if this is a simple song, I really respect the ambition of it. Khary is an artist that I'm very glad I went ahead and checked out in the earlier stages of his career, because watching him grow throughout the last several years has been a really great experience. He got me through my high school years, and that was great. And now seeing him moving on to even bigger and better things, even wider ideas, is very impressive to me. I love the artistic ambition that certain moments took on his debut a few years back, and the writing and everything about that one is still just being improved here and becoming even more ambitious. Calling back to what I said before, the production is of such strong note, and I have to give props to Mike Irish, who produced most of the album, who is a frequent collaborator with Khary, so they're not in entirely uncharted territory here, but both of them seem to be really giving this project their all. And all of that isn't to discredit his previous work, it's just that it was a lot simpler and a little bit more grounded overall, but seeing something more experimental from him is just even more exciting for me at this point in my musical preferences. A Desperate Attempt to Love Everything is an album with a lot of layers to peel back and is very rewarding on re-listens. There's a ton of emotion and storytelling and things along those lines that make for a profound experience as well. The beautiful sounds and diverse approaches will keep you invested in the experience even when that's not occurring. Khary as a songwriter, rapper, and singer, and Mike Irish as a producer are a great dynamic duo, and I would love to see them work pretty much exclusively like this in another full-length project form in the future, because if it goes up from here, it's just really his peak. What's presented to us here in general is pretty impressive to any type of listener, but as someone who's watched his come up to this point, it's even more impressive. While he has several songs that have blown up and gotten over 1 million plays, most of those are with other artists, and it's still very perplexing to me how he's still somewhat of an undiscovered and hidden gem in the underground of abstract, alternative, and pop rap. I've re-listened so much of his music in the past, and it's always something that I just return to because it's so easy to. He feels very down to earth, and at the same time manages to be such a good songwriter. And like I said, his simpler moments have gotten me through my high school experience a few years back, and then 2020 going forward, just seeing him evolve and progress as an artist like this has been great. It's somewhat unrelated to the music itself, but I can speak on the fact that he seems to be a very great guy overall too, without getting too parasocial with him. I've actually met him at shows 2 times already. I saw him in Chicago and Madison. In Madison, there was a very wholesome moment with one of my friends. It was just very nice. He decided to play a song for him that he really wanted to hear for personal reasons, and I found that very heartwarming. Every time I've talked to the guy, he's been very down to earth and seems to respect and have a lot of love for his fans, so maybe just become one of those fans. If you are a fan of hip-hop in really any lane, I feel like this could appeal to you. Go ahead and give it a listen. It's a fun album at the very least. And if you've stuck around for this long, you probably enjoyed the video, found it informative, or at least I introduced you to some cool new music. So go ahead and drop a like on the video if you would not mind, and go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Hit notifications for new album recommendations on a regular basis and more music-related content coming your way. All of that would be greatly appreciated as well. If you would like to start a discussion about this album or give me any suggestions for the future down in the comment section below, that is great to see as well. So that's just about going to wrap it up for this one, and I will see you in the next video.